again, there's a lot more focus on top of funnel, right? So there was a period where all of that would happen through efforts of marketing and inbound, etc. And we recently are getting more and more requests also to help with outbound. But you can become a lot smarter in your outreach, right? And you can basically build smarter cadences around your outreach that make that call, I would say, more like a warm call than a cold call, as it was in the old days. But I think at the end of the day, having that capability, having that confidence to be able to reach out to someone that you haven't spoken to before is still a crucial element of the sales function at the end of the day.
Welcome to Road to Revenue Leadership, a show that candidly explores how hard it is to create, build, and scale world-class revenue organizations by leaders that have been there, done that, and have seen the results. My name is Dylan Mendes, founding CEO of ViewSite, and I'm excited that you're tuning in to the podcast. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Enjoy.
Bart, for the people that don't know Bart Van Eijck, how would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Right. So my name is Bart Van Eijck. I'm Dutch, born and raised, I would say, probably in Rotterdam, although I have moved around a little bit. My career has been sales, marketing, some consulting. I'm a proud father of 5, so I have a large family, lots of mouths lots of mouths to feed, and a cat and 2 dogs. So it's a busy household.
You can say that.
And I love, I love running, sports in general. I love, anything to do with business or business economics, management. I have a very broad science fiction, sailing. I have a very broad line, broad interests, basically. So
Okay. A large family, loves business, loves a lot of sports, hobbies here and there. So a very, very good and busy life, I can suppose.
Yep.
All right. Well, Bart, thanks for that introduction. Of course, in this podcast, we would love to deep dive in your road to revenue leadership, and of course, also get your learnings, your failures, your false beliefs that you had along the way.
Sure.
And so maybe just, start wherever you want to start, but can you tell us more about your road to revenue leadership?
Yes, absolutely. So my road to revenue leadership probably started when I was 12, when I needed money to buy my first computer, and which I can tell you, and I'm showing my age here, at that time was actually quite an expensive thing to get your hands on, and not very common. So I did, I found a lot of jobs basically to fund my desire to get my hands on a personal.
What was the first job then at the age of 12?
So it was mostly washing cars, mowing lawns, helping out in
I did
shops,
the mowing
etc.
lawns too.
Yeah. Flipping burgers, of course, and stuff like that. So, probably pretty much what it is today when you're, 12 or 13 or 14. Yeah.
So you started at an early age with certain needs, we'll call it like that.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
You found a way. You found a way to get the money, to get
I did,
to acquire the things that you wanted.
And that's my first big lesson in life. I worked probably for a year to get enough money to make the investment. And I'll never forget that I think it was probably 2 or 3 weeks after I had made the purchase, the model had gone out of style, and so a new model came on the market. So the computer I bought was then reduced in price by 50%, which meant like a half year labor went out the window.
Oh gosh,
just like that.
Hey.
So that's how you learn, right? So
that's yeah. Make sure to keep to be aware when the updates come out, for sure.
So and then moving on from that, I did studies in business administration, which basically groomed me, I guess, for a life in business. And I really, I think when we graduated, we had to do like an internship, and I was asked together with a colleague of mine to write a strategic marketing plan for a technology import-export firm. And we really enjoyed that.
Is that also what gave you kind of an idea of what you would do after after doing your
Absolutely.
studies?
Yeah, I would say that was probably quite pivotal, because then I thought, oh, this is great fun. We need to do it. And one of the things that was fun about it is, these guys imported hardware like network cards and hard disks, etc. And at the end of our internship, they said, okay, we've got a lot of stuff that's now outdated that we don't want to have in stock anymore. So why don't you go and sell this to whomever in the market is interested in taking these on? So that's got us, that got us our first taste of B2B selling, I would say. In perspective, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's so funny. It's always. I mean, I hear that a lot, and if I look back at my own experience so far, entering the sales context, the sales environment is just by some sort of coincidence. Yes, I studied business, and yes, I was active in a student association where I did sales. But it's funny because if I had done something in finance or something in logistics, maybe I would still with the same mindset and perseverance and discipline gone into that field. But at the end time, I'm ending up in sales because of that initial touch point. And so, funny that in some way in your context, it has also now shaped your, what is it now, 30 years of career already?
Yeah. So that's what it is. That's what it is. So I
you say it with a
it's a long time,
what
right?
a lifetime.
You always think like, gee, you feel like 25, but you're not quite 25 anymore. But
But I like that you still feel like it, though.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I still do. So what I did after graduation is I joined an ERP startup firm in the Netherlands, and I was, we were a company of 7 or 8, so it was a small company, and I was the sales guy together with the commercial director. So we had great fun trying to get some logos in.
It's a good environment to learn also, no?
Absolutely.
You have the direct mentorship.
Yeah, I learned a ton, and we landed one of the biggest deals, or probably the biggest deal of the in the lifetime of this company, KLM Catering Services, and I was very proud to be to be doing that. But that also exposed me to Hewlett Packard and like American companies, and they were talking a lot about a company called Gartner, which I'd never heard of, but found quite intriguing, and Magic Quadrants, etc. And then at that time, it was still, internet was still not quite common, right? So I read an ad in the paper, and so I from Gartner, and for a job opportunity. So I called them, and I got the job after a couple of rounds. And that's what really kind of kickstarted my career, I would say, in sales in earnest, because until that time I'd been learning from books and, from my mentor and, in the business. But now we were scaling things up quite seriously and quite fast as well. And I had the pleasure and the luck that I could, as Gartner was growing, I could grow with the company. And
because what was the initial role within Gartner?
I was an account representative, as they call it, right? Okay. So carrying the bag and selling to mostly insurance and financial companies in the Netherlands was my remit at the time. And I did. I guess I did okay, because they thought then after a couple of years I should go and run, a small team, then a bigger team. And I ended up running EMEA sales, which was a big corporate job, 24 countries, 500 salespeople. So, a lot of change there. A lot of change.
I think you can say.
When I left, basically, yeah.
I have then to ask Bart, because Gartner, it's definitely not a small organization, and I think that you quickly took on a lot of responsibility, and so I think also a very, very interesting period in terms of learning and growing. And so if you look back at those years at Gartner, what would you say that's above all things is really the thing that I brought with me for the rest of my career?
Oh, I wouldn't know where to start, but I would say because it's a very intense quarter to quarter environment, right? So if so in terms of the day to day, the sense of urgency and that every second counts almost is something that you never that never leaves you anymore, right? It is like this is On the other hand, Gartner, particularly later on in my career, became a very well-oiled and well-organized machine. I think it wasn't that when I joined, but it definitely became that later on. And that's where I learned that if you have vision and if you set the parameters and you think about what you want to achieve, then you can actually plan for it and get there, right? So in terms of the going from individual contributor to working with a team to, becoming, I guess, a leader, there are very distinct differences between those roles. And that was something that I wasn't aware of course, when I set my ambition and told my, at that time, country manager that I wanted his job, at some point in time.
I was going to ask that question specifically.
Yeah.
Is it them? Is it the team, the leadership team at Gartner that saw some potential in you and said, Bart, we need to sit down and, talk your career path? Or did you come up with your own proactivity and said, you know what, I want to get there. How do I get there? What are the steps that are required? And, how was that in your case?
It's a bit of both, I would say. So it started off in the latter, like me pushing. And then at some point when you actually, I guess, deliver and the trust in the leadership team in you grows, then you get pulled into stuff, and and then you have to learn to say no as well, which is not easy, right? Because you can be pulled in a lot of directions, and that is also a risk.
True. You need to know what you want out of your own life before you can say yes or no to certain things.
Absolutely, yeah. And
so
that's very important.
2 ways. How did you feel then? Because also, if you are a very, very strong individual contributor, doesn't mean that you will be a very strong leader. So it's, to some extent, they also had to challenge that in some way. Did you remember how they did that in some way?
Well, they there's lots of, as you grow in your role, and Gartner was always quite careful with the first stages, right? So and they took their time in letting you get, I guess, adjusted to the situation. So I guess that is an important factor in terms of, okay, what is it that you're able to do? But then I think a lot of it is also about, how do you challenge yourself, right? So you if you want to get to where you want to get to, you can't do what you've always done, right? Is you have to change, and you have to think about what is it that in this particular role is important to change, is important to do, that I didn't do previously, right? So when I got asked to run, for example, a number of countries, I knew that I needed to put my arms around that organization and also make people feel that they could, first of all, trust me, of course, but they would benefit from the fact that I would be, running that region. And so to do that, you need to have some level of vision. You need to think about values, what values are important for the team, etc. And most importantly, you need to set direction, of course, right? So that's those things you get taught. I got taught quite, quite overtly in Gartner. And so once you kind of start to grasp that and apply it, and you see what the impact it can have, then that's quite exciting.
Was there a lot of competition also when you try to move up the ladder?
There is always competition. Like in sales, I never really worry too much about the competition. I think if you trust in your own strength and you trust that you're doing the right things, then typically things move in your direction, right? So I'm, that's more my kind of mentality.
Yeah, I feel that. I kind of like that mentality. It's not because you're colleagues that all of a sudden you have to go in competition to one another. You still work as a team.
Is, the guys and girls that I was in competition with, most of them also did really well, and they found other jobs, some in Gartner, some outside. So it's a big world, right? There's lots of opportunity.
The ocean is big enough. I mean,
it is
enough opportunities.
Definitely big enough. Yeah.
Get there. All right. So then you had your Gartner experience. Can you maybe also share, the rest of your road to revenue leadership?
Yeah, of course. And actually, it's quite interesting. because you asked, so something about my personal perspective and also some of the things that maybe you had to change and realize when you move into a corporate job like this. I flew to Stanford every 3 months to report to the operating committee, etc. There was lots of stuff that I needed to start doing that I enjoyed, but not as much as I used to when I ran with a team and actually was out there speaking with customers. I traveled a lot. I was probably on the road, 3 or 4 days a week on average. And of course, as I said in the beginning, we had quite a big family, so that became a challenge. My wife had her own business as well, so we were stretched quite thin. And so the opportunity came along to go and work still within a Europe, Middle East, and Africa kind of remit, but then with a team that was a much smaller of size in a very different industry, with a company called Expedia, which you probably know as well, right? And I've
heard of it.
And we could move to the UK as a result of this. So as you can imagine, during those last years in Gartner, the pressure was still, on all the time. I was traveling more and more. Personal life was not maybe always what you'd like it to be. And so we collectively made the decision that this would be a really good thing for us as a family to do. And we made a call and we moved jobs and we moved countries at the same time. So if you'd ask me now, would you do it again? I would probably think about it quite hard. Because again, that was not a small thing, as you can imagine, right? Not for me, but definitely also not for my wife and the
because previously you were then in the Netherlands going to the UK. Is that how it was?
Yeah, that's where I spent most of my time because the European.
And I can also imagine that you still had pretty young children back then as well.
We did, yeah. So they
still had to find a school over there, really grow up over there as well.
Yeah. So if you want to say, so I'm a curious guy, right? I like to learn and I like to try new stuff. And, sometimes, and that's great, but you can also sometimes chew off a bit more than you maybe bargained for. So that was a lesson that I learned for sure over that period.
I can definitely imagine that in some way it's also difficult for you because you are reinventing the new in a new environment and stuff like that, but also for your family, and you still have that responsibility over them as well.
Of course.
Or at least that core responsibility with your wife. So it's probably not as easy as it sounds. I mean, it's easy to say yes, but then to make it happen and to go through with it.
It's a big job. And what I also found was, because I'd been with Gartner then for 16 years, so I'd been there for quite a while, right? Then, and the culture, it's both American companies, so I thought the culture would be quite similar, etc. But of course, the travel industry is a very different business than the corporate, white collar kind of suit-based industry of Gartner, right? So that was different. The industry was different. It was great fun, right? It was a fantastic. Both are fantastic companies to work for. But that transition and understanding the slang. Getting to building up your network again. I knew pretty much everybody in Gartner, of course, in that period of time. Then you go to a new job, a high-profile job, right, as well, and you need to establish yourself, and you need to establish your internal network really, really quickly as well.
Didn't they challenge you on that? That you weren't quite familiar with the industry yet, with the jargon, with everything also within the company?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but at the end of the day, they also recognized that what I could bring to the organization, and I worked in a division called Affiliate Network, which is basically the B2B part of the Expedia business. And so, and they were quite, how do you say it, new to the world of business-to-business selling. I mean, Expedia is, of course, known from its, massive operation around selling to consumers. And they have a big group of people that work in basically selling hotels, basically procuring hotels, if you will. inventory. But when they were looking for someone to actually help them change up that environment in EMEA,
It resonated.
That was quite a good fit. Yeah.
What was then the thought process you went through? I think you mentioned already some elements, but can you maybe bring us back to those days that you were thinking of maybe looking out for new opportunity and then coming across that opportunity at Expedia? What were then, the thought process, the question that you asked yourself to make the decision?
So one thing that I was really keen on doing is changing my view, changing industry. I also, at that time, so we're talking, early 10s, right? If you can call it that. So 2010, 11, 12. Internet, of course, had then by that time been established. E-commerce was no longer a buzzword. It was actually happening. Amazon, all those kind of things were happening. Companies like Expedia and Booking were doing a lot of stuff, I would say front runners in terms of e-commerce as well. And in my world in Gartner, I only caught a whiff of that, right? It was only like, you read about it and you'd hear about it, but you would not understand it necessarily from a experience point of view. And I thought that was really important at that time, back to my curiosity thing, is to actually, gain that experience and get access to that market. And so, and of course there were other companies that I was interested in, but that was, what made me say yes.
Was timing also a very important factor?
Timing was important. As I said, there were a lot of personal, things going on that, that push you in a certain direction. At the time, Gartner was doing fantastic. I was in really good position. So it was, in retrospect, you could question whether it was a great idea to do this. But I think, from a fulfillment point of view, from actually, having seen, what I've seen since, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, and I think, I think you still worked for more than 10 years at Gartner, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've seen a lot of changes over there. I think it also depends maybe on, what kind of environment you like to work in. As you mentioned, if all of a sudden it's being too structured, too systemized, it's too much of actually anything except maybe bringing value, but more, going more on the risk stuff of the business then.
Yeah.
And that's not for you then. I think it totally makes sense that you kind of looking for a new opportunity, a new challenge. Maybe if you then bring that experience from Expedia back here on the table, you were the B2B sales guy, let's say like that. So what kind of, visionary thing did you bring in on the table in the business that, really changes the activity? Because I've seen on your LinkedIn, it's publicly in there, so I don't think I say anything wrong with it. But you still increased 30% of the revenue from 2012 to 2015. So I think that you did something particularly interesting that's maybe worth mentioning here in the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I will be the first to say that it was not me only, of course, right? So there's a lot of factors that contribute to making growth like that happen. Probably the biggest single factor was the fact that Expedia at the time, I think together with Booking, only owned 6 or 7% of the global travel market, right? And they were at that point in time, the two biggest players. They were the two biggest spenders on Google globally, right, in terms of ad spend, etc. And they could only capture 6 or 7% of that market. So, so the first thing I should say is that Expedia, management or leadership, when they realized, hey, we got 3% of the market, meaning there is another 97% out there to be had. We can either grow organically or we can see if we can tap into that in some other way. What they came up with the notion of actually taking that hotel booking engine and making it available to anybody who had traffic that could convert was probably, the first and foremost and most intelligent idea to actually do. When I joined, the operation was already quite nicely underway. And what I think I managed to contribute to it was, first and foremost, building a sales method into the organization, which is, we will come back to value selling later, but that was a big, I think, a big component of it. We also had to rationalize who we go after, right? So at that point in time, we had an open API. Anybody that wanted to get access to that API just had to drop in their email address, and they would get the documentation and they'd be on their way. And so I think the affiliate network at the time when I joined had 15,000 affiliates. But of course, only 100 of those affiliates actually produced anything useful, and the rest was just a lot of noise and actually also quite a lot of work.
So 20/80 rule again.
So we were, it was a bit more extreme than 20/80, but it was, it was, it was kind of like that. So I did, I worked with the team to rationalize that, figure out, okay, what is our, what's our ideal customer profile? What, who do we actually want to have in the mix here? And then
was that actually your first? Because obviously we'll come back on the topic of value selling, but was that also the first time, your first touch point with the methodology behind value selling? Or did it start at Gartner?
Yeah, it was Gartner. So my first week in Gartner, I was flown to Stamford, Connecticut, and I got trained in value selling by the founder of value selling at the time, a gentleman called Lloyd Zappington, who introduced us into the whole methodology, and I think it's been the household methodology for Gartner for 20 years or something like that. But I tried plenty of other sales methodologies, spin selling, solution selling, Miller Hyman, all kinds of other sales methodologies that are out there, and all have good, really good and strong points. I'll be the first to say, but yeah, my first experience was with value selling was in Gartner, and then I subsequently hired them a couple of times in other roles that I had, and saw what impact it would have if you get not just sales, but also other parts of the organization aligned around, how you approach your customer.
Interesting. Obviously, you might be a little bit biased in the answer of my next question, but if you have tried out the different methodologies, why sticking then with value selling, or what was different with the other methodologies? Is it also maybe depending on context, sales environments, culture?
Depends on where you are as a business, right? Depends on what you're looking for. Depends on what type of business you're in, right? So I'm sure you're familiar with Challenger sale, the sales methodology from Challenger. It's which is also a very strong approach. If you look at where you can apply that particular approach, it's probably better in areas where the salesperson has to be the expert to convince the customer than it is elsewhere. And you could argue that maybe that is the case in more and more areas. I think that is also the challenge with the Challenger sale is that, that a lot of customers don't feel comfortable being challenged, right? And more importantly, a lot of salespeople are very uncomfortable challenging a C-level, a CEO or a COO or CIO on their beliefs, right? That's a tall order. So, but again, if you look at other techniques, and there's lots of them out there now, gap selling, winning by design, Sanderson, there is a ton of them out there. A lot of them are similar to what value selling does, in the sense that they are much more focused on customer need, understanding the customer need and addressing that need, I would say, than
customer-centric selling, another one also.
Yeah.
I feel like that often, they all mean the same thing, they just phrase it differently.
Yeah, true. And then I think the more important element is the application and applicability of the approach, right? How easy is it to get the organization to adopt it, right? Because at the end of the day, when you roll out or when you introduce a new way of working, then you're transforming, then you're changing stuff, and change is not easy, right? So how do you make it happen? And then I think that's probably the the kernel where I think value selling is actually quite good, and actually making that happen for a number of reasons.
All right. I suggest we come back to that because I'm definitely curious on the adoption and implementation aspect of it.
Sure.
But I don't think we are done yet with the road to revenue leadership. So maybe take us back. You can make it as short as or as long as you want. It doesn't really matter. But just to get a complete picture of your road to revenue leadership.
Yeah.
So after
no,
Expedia
I'll
Group,
walk you through what I did subsequently. So I worked for Expedia for 3.5, 4 years. Then I got the opportunity to work for a startup, which again, I've done corporate, I've done travel and internet related kind of business. And then the startup came along in social media monitoring, and they needed someone to help them set up their sales organization because they didn't have one. It was mostly founder led. So I helped them set that up. Then I moved into another, I would say, transformation role, which was with a company called Global Data, which is like a Gartner for market data and analytics, I guess you could call it. And the CEO of that business asked me to join because he said, we're going to be doing a lot of consolidation. We're going to be bringing a lot of new businesses in. And I want us to be sure that we don't lose focus on our existing clients and we keep that ship steady. In fact, I want it to continue to grow as we bring all those other companies in.
Yeah, how was that like? Because indeed, if you have those different companies with different processes, different methodologies, perhaps, how do you then try to, maybe can you share maybe a bit about that experience?
Yeah, it was great fun. It's a lot of it is to do with I think we integrated 5 or 6 companies in a period of like a year and a half, 2 years. And so again, for me, it was really important, and I made that actually, how do you say it, a quite important element of me taking a role on, is that we would have that common language and we would have a common approach. So I actually said, okay, I'm happy to take the role. It sounds really exciting, but I want to make sure that I have the budget and the freedom to actually make, build that, build that platform and build that common language across the different organizations and departments.
Was it also in that consolidation where the companies were they complementary to each other, or were there also sometimes overlapping business activities?
They were mostly complementary. So imagine that there is like a company that is focused on gathering data from soda and software drinks. Then there is a company that's gathering data on building and projects. Then there is a company that's gathering data on healthcare and medical devices, etc. So they're very distinct target audiences. So so the sales teams would be very distinct. The knowledge in-house, the consultants, the project managers, the analysts. So there was very little, I guess, in terms of overlap stuff there. What we also found out, which I was, which I was a bit disappointed with, there wasn't that much overlap in, for the customers either, right? So if I was buying this particular set of data from Global Data, would I then be interested in procuring, I don't know, tourism information as well? Probably not, right? So the cross-pollination was a bit more, I would say, limited in the end.
Gotcha. All right. So then you, if I'm not mistaken, you also co-founded an own startup, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So we actually, that job at Global Data was at the time when my wife and 3 of our kids moved back to the Netherlands because of schools, because of, I guess, social factors. And so I still had my 2 oldest to graduate. So I needed to be there for another year anyway. And so this was actually quite a good interim thing from that perspective.
Okay.
But yeah, I got in touch with an old acquaintance who had, built up lots of startup businesses and scale-up businesses, etc. Over time. And he approached me. He said, I'm really looking for someone to help me, pick up this business idea and run with it and basically build up a company around it, etc.
That's
So I
amazing.
was very flattered because that
How
was
do you
another one.
come from corporate environments where you literally
Yeah,
speak of turnover above, around the almost billion, to
yeah.
then say, all right, you know what? I know I have a gap year or something. I'm just gonna co-found something and we'll make the best out of it. How you to make that happen?
That's why I still feel 25 sometimes, right? So it's it's
I love
probably
it.
yeah. Well, it was great. It was a great, and you're gonna laugh when you hear what happened, but it's because it's one of those you can't make this up, right? Kind of story. So the idea behind the business was that we were gonna help parcel delivery companies with the last, well, not even mile, but the last couple of 100 meters. Okay. So at the
Okay.
time that we had these conversations, it was 2019, and in the Benelux, about 25% of parcels were not delivered at the door, and that
Mhm.
caused lots of friction in the system, lots of extra cost. There was a limited number of drop-off points. Customers were getting very irritated by this,
Mhm.
etc. Right? So my partner had come up with this brilliant idea as to how to solve that with technology, which I won't go into too much detail, but actually it was quite a neat solution.
Mhm.
And we built it in India, where the development team that was part of his bigger remit was based. And we found some interest in the market with the main players at least in the Netherlands, DHL and PostNL.
Mhm.
And about a year in, we were ready to kind of roll out, and we had a test site south of Rotterdam, 10,000 addresses where we're gonna roll this out. And by
All
then
right.
it was April 2020, and
Oh, I see.
and,
COVID hit.
and
Oh,
I got a call from DHL saying, "Hey Bart, our drop rate has just gone up to 100% as COVID has now made it that everybody has to be at home. So we're
all
gonna
right.
postpone this pilot, let's say for
Mm.
half a year, and then maybe we can look into it again."
I
So
thought it would be an amazing opportunity, like boosting business activity. But yeah, as it was still a pilot project, people say
yeah,
not a priority for the moment. Let's
and
just put it on the
particularly
side.
because these are very operational businesses, right? And rightly so. So they
Uh-huh.
have to get stuff out, and so even to get them to agree with making this bandwidth available pre-COVID was hard enough as it was, but then there was just no way that we're going to do it. And
No
of course the half
chances.
year became a year, etc., etc. So sadly we did try to pivot with our technology and see if we could find another use for it, but
Uh-huh.
at the end of the day we decided that we would put our efforts into other greater things and move on from there. So that was a bit disappointing, very costly and very time consuming, but
Yeah.
great learning
Yeah. Because
in the end as
for how
well.
long did you try to get it then out of the ground?
So
For a
we
good year?
started the exercise in 2019, and we're actually winding it down, now. So it'll be 4 years or close to 4 years. Yeah.
Wow. All right. And then you said, all right, this is not gonna happen, so I'm gonna do something else,
Yeah. And
which
then
is what you're
of
doing,
course,
right?
I had the option to go for, what I've always done, a corporate leadership role, or do what I
Mm.
did and join value selling. And so I thought about that long and hard. And to be honest, at the end of the day, because I had done so many, I'd been in so many industries with so many businesses doing what I did
Right.
at various levels. I'm like, okay, if I do this again, then how am I going to get my excitement up, and how am I going to,
Mm-hmm.
get really kind of, gun for it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I thought, okay, if I go and do, take this partnership with value selling, I can actually still work with lots of different businesses. So there's lots of variety, lots of different environments to work with. I can hopefully share some common sense and some good thinking of stuff that I've learned over the years, which maybe someone will think, hey, that's actually quite neat. And I can also keep the family side of things, in a
Mm-hmm.
good stage. At least that's the idea. in terms of your, I guess your work-life balance or whatever, if you want to call it that, right? So
I think, more in control, at least, let's say, of your own wishes and wants.
Because, and that's just a trade. If I go in all the way, right? So it's not
200%.
like we're doing this like half-baked and, so it's, and even now it's with value selling, we're now 2.5 years in. You build up your network, you build up your competencies, you build up your, I guess, your brand, which is why, it's so great to do things like this as well.
Well, happy to do so, Bart. And maybe let's.
You think that? You think everybody knows you? You think everybody knows what you've done? Of course not, right? I mean, it's a big world out there, and there's, the people that are now, in control, that are now kind of, the decision makers. They were not the people that were in my network or, the decision makers 15 or 20 years ago, right? So things evolve really fast. And so you have to stay current and you have to invest in kind of, keeping the profile up.
Yeah. Well, I like that that vision, that philosophy of, let's call it lifelong learning.
Yeah.
But maybe, bring us in this value selling story, because I guess that a lot of people have already heard it, are familiar with the methodology, but still I think also plenty of people are not still quite aware of what the methodology or how it is built. What's the framework behind it, what's the ideology behind it. So maybe you can kind of explain us
maybe
that.
To start with, right? So there's lots of new and really good techniques nowadays as well, and some of them I use. Some of the latest. I try to read and keep up with with all the developments. Of course, it gets harder and harder, like with music, right? To come up with something original. At some point, everything has tried everything. Everybody's tried everything.
Exactly.
But the environment, the world that we live in, things change around it, and so you have to adopt and and go with. And what I one of the elements that I think is still maybe even more relevant than it has always been is trust, right? So trust between the person that is looking for a solution and the person that's offering that solution. And the nice thing that I always found with applying an approach like value selling is that it's really based on building that trust, and it's really based on actually understanding your clients or your prospects' motivation more than anything before you go into actually, okay, well, let me tell you what we've got, right? And so giving that nugget to salespeople around the globe basically is already is still quite an eye-opener, funnily enough, if you call it that. But if I talk to sales leaders and even company leaders, then the other thing that I find, and I mentioned that earlier, that is probably even as important, is that this is not just the sales function that you need to influence and change on that, but it is basically everybody that touches a customer, as I always like to put it, right? It needs to be in that same mode of thinking, and needs to be appreciative of, what is it that is actually behind the question, right? What is it this customer actually trying to achieve, rather than just blurting out, here are the 3 great things that we can do, and, why don't you go and try it, basically.
Right.
And even if you look at nowadays, of course, it's a lot more buyer-led, right? So the whole ecosystem of selling has changed incredibly, right? I mean,
I wanted to ask you that, especially with all those existing methodologies, to come back on, enumerating all of those that exist.
Yeah.
When you see that indeed we're entering environments where it's much more buyer-led, where technology replaces a lot of salespeople, how do you still try to find a balance between, the core fundamentals of those methodologies, but still make it up to date to the times of today?
Yeah. Well, I think it's even more relevant now than it has ever been, because at the end of the day, because the buyer is doing a lot more homework themselves, and they are actually, looking, well, basically using sites like, Gartner and others to compare and contrast, options. At the end of the day, when they then finally get to the point that they say, okay, we want to have a conversation, we want to actually see how this would work, then if you then fall on your face, then that's an even bigger shame, right? Because then all that investment that has already been done by marketing and other parts of the business just goes to waste. Okay, so so I think it is even more relevant for people that are customer facing to actually acknowledge that that need, or that solution that the customer has in mind, versus leading with your solution or product as such.
Do you work? Because I think that's a trend that we have seen in the US for maybe quite a while now, and that I think is entering now also the European continent. But you see roles such as Chief Revenue Officer popping much more than ever before. And I think it makes sense. It's also, just like you said, any customer facing
Absolutely.
Employee, needs to also be part of this thinking, of this, I'm not going to say methodology framework, but this thinking and this philosophy that sales is not everything, but everything is sales. Or there's a quote such like it, it probably much better than I do. But so, you see, is that also then the people you work with mostly?
Yeah, it's actually a broader and broader remit, I would say. So I ran a workshop a month or two ago where the sales leader of that organization was in a software banking kind of environment. Said, okay, I want to expand this, this to the project management, the people that are in pre-sales, the specialists, the program managers, so that everybody understands how we are looking at a customer and how we communicate with the customer. And I haven't actually told you, but value selling, a lot of what value selling is actually communication, is about how do you have that conversation with your customer. And within that context, you build certain questions, and there's a question technique behind it that you develop, and actually applying that to a much broader group than the sales organization also helps, for people to kind of, become kind of, singing from the same hymn sheet, as they say. And I think it's, if you look at it from a project point of view, or from how do you approach, a project or an RFP or an RFI or whatever you want to call it, then everybody also starts to look through the same lens as to how do we address this customer and the stakeholders within that account. So that's quite powerful.
Interesting. Looking back at your own experiences with those different clients, different projects, where do you see that that's the number one thing that people struggle with, or find the most value out of your teachings?
Okay. I think it is still making that connection. Okay, so I mean, there's lots of parts of the sales cycle that are hard. What I noticed recently is that again, there's a lot more focus on top of funnel, right? So there was a period where all of that would happen through efforts of marketing and inbound, etc. And we recently are getting more and more requests also to help with outbound again, which I find quite intriguing, right? So there's like a bit of a, how do you say it, a wave continuum here, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I understand that, especially. Maybe I should ask that question to you first. Do you think cold calling dead or prime years to do it?
No, I think it is very much alive. I think it's very important for different reasons. And I wouldn't, maybe cold calling is no longer the right term for it, because I don't think that, at the end of the day, cold calling as such was super effective. Right, if you
it's not pure cold, no.
Yeah, and I guess dealing with the negativity of it is also not a great motivator, right? At the end of the day, but you can become a lot smarter in your outreach, right? And you can basically build smarter cadences around your outreach that make that call, I would say, more like a warm call than a cold call, as it was in the old days. But I think at the end of the day, having that capability, having that confidence to be able to reach out to someone that you haven't spoken to before is still a crucial element of the sales function at the end of the day, right? If you're worried about talking to someone, then you're probably not in the right job, basically, I would say.
I 100% agree with you. And also, I think at least for the moment being. I think it's also a very hard thing to automate, which makes it by definition then also very one-to-one, authentic, just
Absolutely.
true human-to-human connection.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if you want to create trust, I think that's the thing that you should do.
That's where the trust or
I
happens
think
or
cold
doesn't
call is
happen.
just going to go up actually with time.
Yeah. And to come back to your question about, automation and things becoming more and more, how to say it, pre-planned, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So the buyer journey and all that stuff. We can see from the research from, McKinsey's and the Gartners, etc., out there, that we've all seen that, the buyer wants to have fewer human interaction, wants to do their own homework before they actually engage, etc. I just think that, and I think I made this point, that just makes it even more crucial that you're ready when you then have that opportunity, right? Because and unless you're selling paper clips or stuff like that, is software like most of my customers, like the bulk of my clientele look like they sell complex solutions, not from necessarily from that it's so bloody complicated to build, although sometimes it is, but also in terms of how do you roll it out into an organization that already has.
How do you get the most out of it? Yeah.
Exactly, right. And that's where you need to build that trust, and that's where you need to, really focus on, okay, what is the need that I can address and how do we address it properly is so important. Yeah.
I think the trend is maybe that it's more in terms of the buyer than it is in terms of the salesperson.
Yeah.
So you have to choose so timing is then depending on the buyer, and you just have to stand ready and be there with the right material at hand and the right communication techniques.
And to be ready means that you have to be doing this all the time, right? And therefore it is, I think, to your point of, outreach, I think is, it's very much still there. And now post-COVID, we also have events coming back. We have more and more, the trade shows, etc. So again, right, so that also there you need to know what to say when the moment arrives, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
So Bart, we're almost reaching the end of the podcast, but earlier we touched on the topic of the adoption and implementation of value selling being easier, or at least in your opinion, than any other methodology. And so maybe before we end up and round up this discussion, maybe can you share a bit about how is it, and because I think that adoption and maybe in the bigger sense of the word, it's change management. So how do you, or out of your experience, how do you think you make that happen the best as possible?
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. The challenge I've always had when I either got a training or when I asked a company to deliver a training is to make it stick, right? And so every VP of sales or chief revenue officer or chief sales officer that I speak with, and you ask them, okay, is there anything about this program that you're looking to undertake that makes you uncomfortable? It's always about adoption. It's always about, okay, are people actually are they really gonna take it on or not? And so one of the strong elements, and one of the reasons why I actually decided to go with value selling is because the approach is actually really straightforward. It's without going into too much detail, it basically helps you to plan and deliver that conversation with your prospect in a way that you can manage, that you can oversee, that you can debate pre and post the customer meeting with your peers, with your manager, and therefore, it's very applicable.
Very pragmatic.
A lot of sales techniques are around, are around, is this really really an opportunity or not? Is this, so there are techniques like BAND and MEDIC out there, etc., that are really kind of, help you to say, okay, where does it sit in the pipeline, right?
It's more on the communication, less qualification, less maybe on the communication itself.
Exactly. This takes it a step further and helps you to actually qualify out maybe sooner than you would otherwise do, but also, maintain that healthy dialogue with different parts of the business into that account. And so when we look at the learner journey, we always look at the top management and individual contributors, and how do you actually get them to all take away as much as they can from the basic elements. More importantly, how do you then build a cadence that you start to apply it and that you actually start to become comfortable with it? Because you can't, even though it looks quite straightforward on the face of it, to actually apply it properly, like everything, like anybody knows, you want to be good at something, you have to do it over and over and over again to hone your skill, right? So this is no different than that. The positive point, I think, is because it's very applicable and you can grasp it quite easily, then the adoption rates are typically much higher than you would have with other types of training. Or
there is a quote like that. It goes as follows: simple scales, fancy fails.
Yeah.
Like if you want to make it too complicated, it's just
true.
doomed to fail.
It's
and
true. Right?
Actually, you just want to keep it simple.
Yeah, and that is not easy, right? That's as we all know. When you try and keep it simple, then it becomes really complicated, right? Because there is all these other factors that you want to take into account. So that's, I think, is probably boils it down to the essence.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Bart. Thanks for sharing your road to revenue leadership. Thanks for sharing your experiences in the value selling methodology. If people want to find out more about you, about maybe the value selling methodology, value selling associates, where would you like to send them to?
Well, they can send me an email at bart@valueselling.com. That's probably the quickest. So, or they can check out the website, valueselling.com, of course.
All right. Awesome. Now, Bart, one last question, a question I ask all my guests. And the question goes as follows. So if Bart would be a brand, what would it stand for?
What would it stand for? I would say, it delivers what it says on the tin. That's what it would stand for.
It delivers what it says on what?
On the tin, on the packaging.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, I love it. Again, it comes back to the element of trust, I would say.
Yep, very true.
All right, I'll take that as an answer. Bart, thank you so much. Wish you nothing but the best, and see you soon.
Thank you, Dylan. Take care.
That's it. We have once again reached the end of an episode. I just really appreciate you all spending the time. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Until next week with a fresh new episode.